Hey, SpeakEasy Podcast listeners. I appreciate you guys coming back. Why? Because this is another episode of the hashtag SpeakEasy Podcast. I'm your host, Altovise, your voice manager. I unmute the voice of women who are ready to speak up about what has kept her silent for way too long. This episode, let's just be honest, we stressed out. But there are some healthy ways for us to not only look at stress, handle stress, but also talk about stress. And I think that's one of the major things as entrepreneurs that we have to be in. We have to make it a healthy habit that we are, dealing with our stress in a positive way. Because if not, man, the stress will lead to you not being able to execute at your highest level. With that being said, I'm excited about my guest for today. Hello, Dr. Nina. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you, Altovise?
I am doing great. And
Great.
so, listen, I am someone who I did not have a great handle on stress for quite so many years of my life. And I don't think I was even ever taught how to handle stress. So it's pretty interesting in my household where I have teenagers and young adults, that Generation Z, who are looking at stress and how to handle it a whole other way. And so I know this is going to be a great discussion today. So with that being said, Dr. Nina, let the studio audience know a little bit about you, and then we're going to go ahead and dive into today's topic.
Sure. So, just to share a little bit about me, I'm actually an ophthalmic surgeon. I'm an award winning medical educator. I'm a senior academic leader at the university, and I'm author of a best selling book called Stress in Medicine, which really talks about the challenges and issues that I faced in my career and in my life that really could have taken me down, but I fought and got through it. So, that book is something that I feel is has opened up a world of vulnerability for me, which I know is really difficult talking about our own challenges. And so part of the objective of writing it, though, was to encourage people to do that because, as Altovise is saying, as you're saying, it's very important to do so.
That's important too. I think there's certain industries around the world where stress, we see the stress, we see it, we know that it's there, but it's still not being talked about. So, what made you decide that you wanted to go ahead and not only deal with the stress, but also put it in a book?
Well, it was really when COVID-19, the pandemic struck. So early on, as an eye surgeon, it's elective procedures that we do. So those procedures were actually all put on hold for about a period of 3 months. My practice with that was impacted significantly. However, with my leadership role in ophthalmology and the study of ophthalmology at our university, I was very much involved in dealing with the residents and students and just disruptions in curriculum and teaching. And so they were under a lot of stress. That actually led me looking into that the stress experienced by them a little bit more, looking at blog posts and whatnot. And then it resonated with me because I thought a lot of what they're facing actually is a lot of what I faced about 20, 25 years ago when I was in medical school. Now it was just heightened by the fact that there was the pandemic and all the uncertainty associated with that. So I thought, these are kind of universal issues in a way. And so I thought, here's an opportunity where I've always loved writing, but I've never had the time to write. So it was sort of a forced closure, which gave me that opportunity. And so I decided to put my own lessons learned into a book.
I love that. I think because a lot of times there's a stigma that if we make it known that there was a stress that we could not handle or that we needed help with, it's this fear that people will think we're inadequate in our position. And I know that in the medical field, a lot of them, that's what they deal with is, if I tell you I'm stressed out and I'm tired and exhausted, then are you going to look at me as less than as a surgeon? Are you going to look at me as less than when it comes to being a doctor? So what's one of the ways that they can kind of handle that, to be able to say, no, stress is something that everyone goes through. And if I don't get a handle on it, then I'm doing myself and the people I'm supposed to help a disservice.
That's a great question. I think it's really important to normalize this. And I think that's the case in medicine. I think that's the case in entrepreneurship, early business owners. It's very true that we're going to go through ups and downs, and that's just the reality of living. And in those types of professions and careers where we're under high stress, it just goes along with it. You can't avoid stress. One of the things that is a challenge for us is that every phase of your medical career is really rooted in competition. So you're competing to get into medical school, you're competing to get into a residency program, you're competing to get a position, a new job in a community. And that's again the case for entrepreneurs, where, as even us as small business owners, when we run our private practices, you are in a state of always wanting to be the best that you can be. So that, number one, I would say you have to normalize the fact that the ups and downs are going to be there and it's expected. And number two is that you have to really look at how you want to define success. So that, we're used to looking at marks, for example, or the number of surgical cases you completed when you were in your training, things like that, exam results, number of publications, research articles, things like that. And in the business world, when you're starting a practice, well, what is that return on your investment that you're making, and how high is high enough? What is success to you? One of the things that I talk about in the book is redefining success, so that we're not so tied to the external measures, in terms of the dollar value or the marks or the number of patients you see in a day or the number of procedures you've done, but more linking it to that internal source of success, where it's the satisfaction that you get from helping someone, or it's recognizing the effort that you put into this initiative or whatever that may be, and the fact that you really gave it your all and you did it to the best of your ability. The idea is to link more to those things so that you can not be so stressed about what the world is thinking of you, and be more comforted by what you've done, and just seeking that measure of success from an internal aspect. It's tough to do because we're not trained in that. I mean, even to get into MBA schools or to get into different programs at universities, it's competitive. So it's a real mind shift that we need to undergo, I think.
Now, seeing that this is also a bigger and broader issue when it comes to the colleges and the universities and the piece that they play in this, and even the job piece that they play in this, where do you see those industries and looking at it from their standpoint, what is the way that they can go ahead and say, okay, enough is enough, something needs to change? And even when they do their changes on their level as the individual student and the individual person in a medical field, what are we missing, and how do we need to change as well?
Well, I think the reality is that the objective measures of success have a place. And so there are certain differentiators that we have to look at so that we know that the person is competent or capable in the skill that we really need them to do when it comes to their work. I think what needs to happen alongside that, though, is that there needs to be, and their shift is happening actually, it needs to be more of a holistic approach where you're looking at marks on the one hand, but you're also looking at, what is the nature of that person? Have they demonstrated other elements of their personality in the way that they communicate with people, in the way that they engage with people when they think they're not being watched? So I feel that the objective measures, we have to have a way to differentiate people. However, there's more to it than that. There's more to a person than, just the marks that they got. So that there has to be an awareness and a support system set up so that people are encouraged to evolve and grow in all aspects of who they are. With certain measures in place for things that are mission critical. So for example, you have to be able to perform a surgical procedure properly or you're not allowed to operate. So those are realities too. And so it's a real balance, I think, that we really need to be looking at, and then offering the supports along the way for those people who may be struggling in one or more of those elements.
That's important. That's very valuable, because I think even when we look at it from the business standpoint, we have to understand that the education is important, but man, the education only takes you so far. And
Mhm.
so it's the human experience. It's the understanding, it's the EQ that allows us to really be able to stand out and say, okay, no, this it has to go beyond what I learned in the book, because when I'm standing in front of someone, that particular scenario may not ever be in a book.
Mhm. Very true.
It may not. And so I love that. Now, as we talk about EQ, can you explain to them, to the studio audience, what EQ is? Because I know that they've been hearing the terminology a lot more now, especially as more people are starting to discuss it and starting to implement it in business and other industries as well.
Absolutely. So EQ is emotional quotient, which is really looking at emotional intelligence. So the idea of emotional intelligence is that our own emotions and how we respond to them actually impacts the people or in the world around us. So that the more aware you are of how you respond in different scenarios, the more able you are to communicate with others in a way that maintains a sense of harmony and draws out the best of other people. So that's something that, you don't really get a lot of formal training in. You get some communication skills, you get some, conflict management skills, but the idea of being self-aware and being able to recognize your emotions and how you respond to them is a very internal process. And so if you're not guided in a way that allows you to really go deep, it becomes a blanket statement of, yeah, I took communications training, great, but it doesn't necessarily translate or impact into your own behavior.
Now, with that being said, too, right now there are a lot of the personality tests that people are taking, and I think there's been kind of a shift, you know, more so recently, where even coaching and entrepreneurs are taking the Miggs Briers, they're taking the DISC assessment, they're taking these different assessments to kind of better understand their own temperament and how they interact with other temperaments. Is there something that is above all of that, that is like something that everybody can take? Or do you see the value in people taking the Miggs Briers and the DISC assessment and the different assessments to learn their personality?
I think that there's value in all of those tests because each one looks at it from a different perspective, so that um, one focuses more on personality, the other focuses more on interaction, another focuses more on emotion, emotional balance. So I do think that there's value in all of those. And some, focus more on team dynamics versus individual personality. So my feeling, though, I strongly believe that the emotional intelligence tests are very, very important. So the one I'm thinking of and the one I'm most familiar with is the EQI2, which is um, rooted in, oh my gosh, his name is escaping me. Um, Bar on. You see, I'm going to translate my measure of success of not having remembered as the idea that it's now coming to me. It's Reuben Ben on Bar on. Anyhow, it came to me, so that's okay. So he actually came up with this model where you've got 5 core competencies and then 3 sub-competencies within each of those domains. And it really is an opportunity to look at, again, those emotional reactions and then how they balance with other characteristics that we have. And all of that can then translate into how you manage conflict and how you communicate with other people. And then those can tie nicely into things like Myers-Briggs and the DISC assessments, which are looking at it not necessarily from an emotional intelligence standpoint, but from an interactive, dynamic personality uh, perspective. So those often are things that we're born with, and we're, there's a tendency towards that, whereas emotional intelligence is something that can actually be developed and evolve. So those are the differences, and that's how they can really come together.
Perfect, perfect. And then um, as we close out this interview, I know that there are still some people that say, well, business is business and you have to take the emotion out of it. When you hear that statement, you probably cringe. But what is normally your response to somebody saying, well, business is business, just take the emotion out of it?
I think that there's truth to that to some degree. And the reason I say that is because, again, there are those deliverables that you have to meet. However, the path to achieving those deliverables does not have to be free of emotion. We feel highs and lows, we feel excitement, we feel disappointment. I think it's important to acknowledge those along the way, but to translate any of the more frustrating emotions into something that evolves into a growth mindset. So I talk a lot about that in terms of, if you're really disappointed with something and there's a new change coming about, for example, and you're having trouble adjusting to that, can you look at your root of motivation, and is there something that you can connect to it, even though you may disagree with it? If you're in a position where there's really no choice, is there something within that you can connect to based on your own value system that then allows you to grow into that idea and express it and deal with it in a way that makes you still feel authentic? So that I think the emotion is important to acknowledge, because if you don't, those frustrations can build and then exhibit themselves in a way that's completely counterproductive and at a time that you may not anticipate. As opposed to, if you are willing to acknowledge it and to sit with yourself in those moments of frustration and to try to find a workaround that can actually be translated into something productive, it can actually help you grow and evolve and still remain connected to yourself. Because the worst thing is when you become disconnected with yourself and then your work, and then you're lost, and then all of those things just contribute more to frustration and irritability and ultimately overwork and burnout, because you're just expending energy on something that you don't have reserve for, because you're just trying to use that energy to get through every day as opposed to really connecting and enjoying what you're working on.
I love this conversation. As entrepreneurs, SpeakEasy Podcast listeners, many of you uh, message me about how you can de-stress. You message me about how to handle the stress of being in business. And, there's never really a concrete answer that can be given to you, because it's going to be individualized. It's according to your personal journey and what you do to handle stress in your life, or what you've learned. Sometimes have to be things that you have to undo, and you have to unlearn some things when it comes to handling stress. But having a stress strategy is very important. That means having something in place to where, when stressful situations happen, you go ahead for a walk, you go ahead, you push away just for a moment to go ahead and clear your head. There are some key elements that you can put in place to be able to handle the stress. It's not to say that it's going to eliminate the stress, but you need to be able to handle it and maneuver through it in order for you, again, to be the best version of yourself. I love this. Thank you so much, Dr. Nina. Let everyone know where they can connect with you and where they can get the book as well.
Certainly. So they can connect with me through my website, which is www.docsinleadership.org. The book is called Stress in Medicine: Lessons Learned Through My Years as a Surgeon from Med School to Residency and Beyond. It presents a framework on how to think about stress and goes through some of the things that I was talking about, which it's presented in the medical context, but definitely relevant to anybody. And that's available on Amazon. So you can certainly, it's available in ebook, hardcover, and paperback.
I love it. Speak Easy Podcast listeners, this is all for you, because without you, there would be no Speak Easy Podcast. With that being said, I am looking forward to hearing your response. Leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform, or you can go and join the conversation, bit.ly/World Voice Community. We would love to hear from you. With that being said, this is your host, Altovise. And until next time, don't forget to press it out. See ya.